could easily make the case that the 1920s is one of those decades that just kind of has a distinctive character, a distinctive personality to it, one that when you to say something about it, there are images that just kind of come to people's minds, whether it's the clothing with the shorter skirts and the fringe, the flappers and all that stuff, prohibition and the speakeasies and all those kinds of things, or the music and movies and all that sort of stuff. It really does, I think, have a very unique and very easy to pick out kind of character and personality to it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that here. And look at the economy of the 1920s, particularly how that was affecting, how it was changing, and how that was not just affecting the way people worked and the way people lived, but it is just overall turning the United States into a type of economy and a type of living situation for a lot of people that we would probably find more familiar, where it definitely does become more what we might consider modern. Again, people in the 20s seem to be sort of obsessed almost with the idea of things being modern and being modern. So the 1920s, is where we start to see a lot of stuff that, again, to us would seem very commonplace, like advertising and shopping centers and all that sort of thing. More and more people living in the cities by this time, and a lot of economic changes are leading to that and changing the way that people live, how they buy things, why they buy things, and what they buy, how much money they have to buy it with, and all of that. We are seeing the rise of a mass consumption economy, what we might call a consumer economy. Now, when we talked about the end of World War I, we said that there was a lot of economic turmoil there at the end of World War I. You had, wages go down, and you had all the labor strikes and all those things. Some plants and factories are shutting down as war contracts were suddenly canceled. So there was an economic struggle and some economic stagnation there at the end of World War I. Things did slow down there right there at the end, but it adjusts relatively quickly. And by 1920, the economy has improved. Wages are going up, business is booming, and that's what you're going to see throughout the 1920s is massive expansions of business. Wages are going up for most workers. They're making more money. Things are more productive, and so that is partially what gives rise to this consumer economy. Now, who's the consumer? Yeah, the customers, most Americans, people that are buying stuff, pretty much everybody. We're consumers. And what we mean by a consumer economy, it is an economy that depends on consumer spending, that depends on large amounts of consumer spending. Now, arguably, the economy has, in a sense, always been a consumer economy. It's always depended on people buying stuff. But this is where that becomes, the main indicator of economic health is how much are people spending. And we need people to spend money. It is a consumer-based economy. And so the emphasis becomes to the average person, not save and be frugal and all of that, but what? Spend. So they want people to spend that money. And the economy we live in today is a consumer economy. When we don't spend, the economy doesn't do very well. And so we see, stimulus packages and different things like that to encourage spending, to get us to spend money, so the economy will not stagnate and have shrink. So as far as why we see this consumer economy, this emphasis on the consumer, an emphasis on buy things, spend, buy stuff that maybe you didn't think you even needed a couple years before, and inventing new products that people didn't think they needed. One of the reasons for this consumer economy is that there are higher wages. As I was saying, wages have gone up in this period. And so that means with higher wages, people have more money to spend. There's more money that people have, or a greater income, and so they have more dispensable income that they can spend on nice fancy things that they like, nice fancy things that make their lives more convenient, that are kind of symbols of prosperity. And the 20s are, full of that economic prosperity. So with more money in people's hands and in the average person's hand, obviously more spending, and that drives that economic growth and drives that economic process. There are also numerous new products in the 1920s. There's all kinds of things available that weren't available before, or that may not have been affordable before, for the average American to purchase. So, because this is when we're, electricity had been around. Of course, electricity was not brand new, but by the 1920s, electricity was starting to become more widely available. It's far more common for the average person to have electricity in their home by the 1920s. And so that means all kinds of electrical appliances, for example, that start to take off in the 1920s, like a washing machine or a refrigerator, all of that. And think of all the things that would mean for people in their daily life to have simple things like refrigeration in their home. Electric lights, other kinds of home appliances, whether they are stoves, that are not, by wood burning, electric stoves and things like that, vacuum cleaners, but not just electrical appliances. Other kind of cars, we'll talk about cars here in a minute, but other kind of thing, clothing and makeup, cosmetics for the first time are being sort of more mass produced, and cosmetics, makeup becoming acceptable for women to wear on a day-to-day basis. That's part of the cultural change that's happening. There's all kinds of consumer products, food products, like I said, cosmetics and toiletries, shampoo and soaps and things like that, advertising the benefits of those things to people's lives, medicine, you name it, all kinds of new products that are being invented. There are, productivity has gone up. There is just an increase in these kind of products being made. Factories, there are new machinery, there's advancements in technology, there are new management techniques, different things that have meant or that have led to there being more products available, more things for people to buy. And a big thing that changes in the 1920s is the advent of what we would see as more modern advertising. Now, there's always been advertising in some way, shape, or form, but it becomes big, big business on its own, where the advertising itself becomes an industry, not just the products that they were advertising, but advertising agencies and executives that design specific ad campaigns for the purpose of, of plugging products and getting people interested in products. And so you see the advertising in magazines and, posters and billboards out in the town. This is where we're in the 1920s. You're seeing the beginnings of movies and stuff, and so they might even come before movies and films, and people are reading more of those magazines. They have more leisure time in the 1920s to do that. So you're seeing these advertising campaigns to push products out to people and to make them seem, fashionable, to make it seem modern, and to other things to encourage people to purchase certain products and to say, you need this. We see that all the time. New products that we didn't think anybody ever had a use for. You think, why in the world would you want that? As soon as we see an ad for it, then sometimes we're hooked. We're convinced. We want to go buy it. Also, another reason why we see this consumer economy of the 1920s, this emphasis on spend, is the availability of credit. What does it mean to buy something on credit?
Instead of paying for it now, you lend it money and then you get back a little tiny bit of interest.
Yeah, so getting it now, we're kind of paying for it later. Today we do that with, credit cards or other kind of things. Installment plans. The installment plan was kind of new in the 1920s. That you can have this thing for, a couple of dollars today, and then you make your installment payments over the next couple of months or whatever with interest. Prior to the 1920s, most people didn't buy stuff on credit. That just kind of wasn't done. Most things you paid for in cash. Credit was not available, and it certainly would not have been available for things like a new washing machine or some other kind of, household appliance or something like that. It just kind of wasn't considered socially acceptable or economically responsible. It just kind of wasn't there. But that changes in the 1920s. There's just a cultural shift, and part of that is because of advertising. Advertising, they're saying installment plan. Get this today. All you need is $5. All you need is this, or no money down. All that kind of stuff, making buying on credit seem acceptable, and then the more it's done, the more acceptable it becomes. The more that is done, the more other businesses realize there's money to be made in that. There's money to be made in credit, and that becoming another industry, in its own right. So with people having the option to get those nice, fancy, really satisfying things now and then pay it off later, plus all the advertisements in people's face to buy this and this will make you look great and this will make your life easier and don't you want to be a fashionable person and all that sort of thing, and new products to buy and more money to buy it with, people are spending, and spending. They can't quite get enough of it. The whole economy starts to be really revolving so much around consumer spending. There's lots of different things that we use as measures of economic health, and consumer spending is one of the big ones. Speaking of new products that people are able to purchase for the first time or that become widely available to the average American for the first time, the 1920s is certainly the age of the automobile, the car. Now, as you probably know, cars had been around, but they were not brand new in the 1920s. They really had been around since the late 1880s, really. But the first ones, of course, were not very efficient, very slow. It was really more of a novelty than anything else. You really probably were going to spend more money on the thing than you would ever save getting anywhere in it. And they also would have been incredibly expensive. The masses, the regular person, the average middle-class American, the average factory worker, the average American family probably found no use for one and certainly couldn't afford one. So that changes in the 1920s. This is when we start to see the mass consumption of cars and that becoming the norm, that becoming the thing that certainly not all, but most American families could afford. And of course, that would be the expectation. And it gets to the point where, you have to have a car. Kind of like today, it's not really there's different kinds of cars, but having an automobile itself, having a vehicle, it's kind of a necessity for most people to get to work and all those sorts of things. The car that does that, the car that is credited with putting Americans behind the wheel, as it were, making the car accessible to the vast majority of the public, was Henry Ford's Model T. And this is a picture of the Model T. So this was the first car that was inexpensive enough and reliable enough that the average worker could afford it. And Ford believed that, the average factory worker, the average person ought to be able to afford these sort of creature comforts. And so Henry Ford, of course, the Ford Motor Company, was very innovative in the production process to make the Model T something that would be affordable to the masses. Most of you know, what did he pioneer that made this affordable? The assembly line, that's right. So the assembly line of having, instead of one or a handful of workers that are putting together every part of the car, it goes down the line and there's one person that, bolts these things and one person that does this with the wheels and then one person that's doing the upholstery to make it more efficient and cutting down the amount of time that it took to build a car. And I don't remember the statistics, but they get it down to, I think it took a couple of days before to maybe a couple of hours. I can't remember exactly what those statistics are. But that means that the price of a Model T was very low, was reasonably low, and something that the average person could afford. And it was very stripped down. There was nothing fancy about that particular car. It didn't even come in all kinds of colors. But this was the car that, most Americans could have. This is what puts people, like I said, behind the wheel, as we say. And that assembly line process, of course, is used in multiple products and multiple industries thereafter. And then with automobiles and the rise of automobiles, of course, that means that, I mentioned the assembly line. The automobiles means that other industries are going to take off. Other products are going to become necessary, and other industries are going to benefit from that. So with everybody getting in cars, what other kind of industries are going to grow, or there be a need for, or what? Okay, roads, highway building, absolutely. Highway building is going to increase throughout the 1920s because people need highways to drive their cars and get all those places. What else? Okay, well, they don't really have too many seatbelts. What other kind of things, though, that would have gone in cars? Or materials that you would have needed? Okay, steel will increase. Oil refinement and gasoline, rubber for the tires, the upholstery, all the different things, the mechanisms that go into making a car, those industries are going to grow and prosper and experience significant development as well. Now people are traveling more. They can travel longer distances in a much more inexpensive way. So we start to see, more motels. The whole idea of a motel, not a hotel, one that you drive through, those springing up all over the country. Garages, gas stations, all that sort of stuff that didn't exist, or there really wasn't much of a need for it. Now that's big business by the 1920s, all because of the automobile, people getting behind cars. What do you think this means for railroads, the old major way of transportation across the country or long distances? Yeah, they will suffer for that. They certainly don't go anywhere. They'll still be pretty big and powerful, but they'll take a hit as people now have a way to get around that is probably less expensive, and that they kind of have more freedom to go where they want to go. And that's one of the things you could argue that the automobile does. It provides that freedom of mobility for a lot of people. And just overall in the 1920s, you could say that on the whole, again, certainly this isn't true of everyone, absolutely not, but there is just kind of an overall increase in the standard of living. For one thing, as we already mentioned, a lot of people making more money, but all these other new products, things that make people's lives easier, being able to use an electric washing machine instead of having to wash all the clothes by hand and scrub them all out and put them all on the clothesline and all that sort of stuff. A vacuum cleaner to clean the floor, refrigerator to refrigerate things. All kinds of household appliances and other things that just made life easier, that made life more comfortable, and that gave people more leisure time. There's far more leisure time for the average American in the 1920s. What's leisure time? Time to relax, time to do what you want to do. Less people are work from sun up to sundown. Now, is that true for some? Of course it is. But there is more time to do things for fun. And so that's one of the reasons why we'll look at this part a little bit later. But we do see the rise of these mass entertainment industries, movies and radio and all that sort of stuff. People have more time for that. People have more time to go in their car and do a little cross-country trip. There's more parks. There's more, recreational opportunities for people, both in the cities, out in the country. More time for people to kind of have fun. Amusement parks and spectator sports. This is the beginnings of professional football, college sports being a big thing. People wanting to spend their time going to those events, listening to those events on the radio, all sorts of stuff like that. So for a lot of people, certainly not true of all people, but, they might have said that the 1920s was a pretty good time to be alive. You have all these kind of new, neat inventions and that make life enjoyable, that make it easier. I keep saying, and that's certainly not true of everyone, but that certainly is part of the sort of image of the 1920s. So what we'll look at tomorrow is some of those new leisure activities. We'll talk a little bit about the radio and stuff like that, and about the cultural changes of the 1920s, jazz music and stuff like that, and how that leads to other social changes. Any questions on that? Okay. One second.